Hey everyone, I'm excited to show you today's game because it kind of taught me a valuable lesson that although you may like to play sidelines, you should probably study them in depth anyways, even if you intend to try to avoid opening study. Let's get into why. So in today's game, I am playing in round number 3 and I am playing against Jifan. And he is a strong player. He's 1980, and I'm a little bit high rated at the moment at 2100. But let's get into the game. He played e4 against me, and I played c5. This is my normal Sicilian, and I am going to be playing a d6 Sicilian if he plays knight f3, which he does. So d6 is played, and then bishop to b5 check. Now, you may not call this a sideline. Personally, I would, generally because it feels like the open Sicilians, the like d4 are that's just the main line, right? Anything else like the Alapin or bishop b5 check or closed Sicilians, they're still good lines, but they're not the main line. The main line is d4. So here, after bishop to b5 check, we're in sideline territory, in my opinion, because again, it's just not played as much. Some consider it to be a little bit less testing. Your arguments can be whatever you want there, but I think that's generally the consensus. And so I played bishop to d7. Now, my tastes have changed over the years actually on this move. Now I'm playing knight b to d7, and the reason why is just to keep a little bit more on the board, and also if they end up taking on d7, I get the bishop pair, so that's a little bit extra for me. And right now there's kind of a threat of a6 and b5 at some point, gaining space on the queen side, which is where I have more space already, and yeah, just playing things out like that. So with bishop to d7, they ended up taking right away. I took, and then they played d4. Now, d4 makes actually a lot of sense, I think. But there's an argument that it's not as strong in this position. Let's go into a little bit why it looks like a good move and why it might be preferred. The first reason is that after takes, there's now queen takes on d4, and there is no knight to c6. But there is something else that's allowed, and that is that after knight g to f6, eventually I can play queen to b6, and I can offer a trade in a way that they actually really don't want to accept, but also it's kind of hard to put your queen on a square that would be nice. Maybe queen to d3, but then you're running into knight e5 and knight c5. So yeah, queen b6 is kind of like the big idea, and why it might not be as preferred. Though, of course, it's totally fine as a line. This isn't like worse for white or anything. But actually, after their next move, maybe it is. The problem is knight to c3 is maybe not how you want to play things. c4 makes a little bit more sense. Or what you could do is you could castle first, and after something like g6, go c4. And here, the move queen to b6 would be a really nice move to play. And this is why d4 may have actually been too early, where now offering the queen trade offers a little bit of pressure relief for black. And the problem is if white avoids it, for example, queen to d3, now there's knight to c5, which is really annoying. And of course, if queen to d1, then there's just knight takes e4 right away. The only move here actually is queen to c3, and that just means that knight takes e4 does not work thanks to queen takes on h8. If you go knight to c3 here, then of course you just trade, go bishop g7, and since the queens are off, the Maroczy bind, it just means a lot less now. So b3, rook c8, like you just kind of play things normally. Maybe b5 is actually threatened here thanks to the pin on the knight, but of course bishop to b2 would be played. But yeah, I think you get the point. Basically here, it looks like d4 kind of just doesn't work out, and these are kind of like the topical engine lines to show that. So with knight c3, since the pawn is on c4, that just means that eventually I could play moves like a6 and b5, and maybe even b4 later. Maybe even look for e6 and d5. That's a little bit less likely at the moment, but b5 is just kind of one of those nice space gaining moves that just wouldn't be possible if c4 had been played. And really, in these types of positions, black is trying to get any space that they can. If they can get just a little bit of space to work with, usually they're doing all right, and that's kind of the case here. So g6 was played, bishop to g7, and my opponent is a little bit lower on time than me, but not by much. For me, it felt like these are all very natural moves. I need to get all of my pieces developed with bishop to g7 now. So bishop g7, rook to d1, and I castle. So without the Maroxy, again, playing c4 instead of knight to c3, they should be focusing on activity, mainly with castling. I think castling would be best here, but instead h3 was played. And yeah, maybe I'm just like too critical of my opponent's play, but the problem with this move is that there's not really any threat of knight to g4 or using the g4 square in any sort of way. But even if there were, it wouldn't change anything because there would still be an attack on the diagonal. For example, if I really wanted to play knight to g4 here, I still could because their queen is hanging. So it doesn't really change anything there. So it's kind of a less useful move. It feels like castling is just much better. Something like, yeah, rook to e1 next or something. Maybe even looking for e5 or knight to d5 for activity. Not immediately, of course. This diagonal is still a little bit scary, but I think you get the point. But yeah, h3 was played. And so I played queen to a5. So this has two purposes behind it, actually. One, just keeping an eye on the bishop. That doesn't hurt. But there's actually a bigger idea, which is b5. b5 could be played here. And that is a space-gaining move without even having to play a6. Maybe it's useful, maybe it's not. But it's something to consider, because after b5 and b4, kicking the knight, that could cause a little bit of problems. Maybe you don't want to play knight d5 so early. Or maybe there's just something else going on. But yeah, something to consider. So queen to e3 was played, just getting off this diagonal, which makes a lot of sense. And now b5 would be really strong. And this is kind of what I mean. Something like queen e3 did make sense before. Maybe they wanted to play that, and that's why they played h3, where now knight to g4 could be considered. Overall, I think that h3 was a little bit of a waste of time. Queen e3 felt a lot more necessary. But would have been really nice if they had castled. So I could have played b5 here. I ended up not doing this, though. But after castles b4, knight d5, rook fe8, black has a pretty good position. For example, queen to b3. Knight takes e4 would be a bad move here, thanks to knight takes on e7 check. But instead, you can take on d5, go queen to a6, and then queen takes on a2. And all of that kind of leads to this specific position where black has a pretty nice game, actually. Right now, b2 is threatened, but you can't really defend it too easily because if you play b3, then c2 hangs. For example, here, b3, c2 hangs. So, yeah, black's doing pretty okay, and that's a little annoying. Again, this is another strong idea. So I played the move rook f to e8. So this is kind of one of those preparatory moves where you're always thinking about knight to d5 and whether or not you have to take it or anything like that. So then I could consider taking it or even ignoring it now thanks to e7 being defended. My opponent castled, and then I played rook a to c8, just putting more pressure on the c file. Not really threatening to take. Generally, taking on c3 as a exchange sacrifice is a little bit better when their king's on b1 or c1 instead of on g1 here. So yeah, maybe something like rook c3 would be a lot more interesting if, yeah, they had castled the other way. a3 was played now. And this is where things get a little bit worse for them because I now have a really strong idea here that I arguably actually had here, but I didn't really want to spoil, which is why rook a8 like isn't as good of a move. I have to criticize both sides. This wasn't really as accurate because of what I could do this move instead, and now that I could do here. So try to consider what white's weaknesses are in the position and see a way if you could try to find a way to exploit them, maybe on the diagonal, maybe with like the c file. I'm trying to throw you off a little bit, but pause the video. Okay, hopefully you had enough time to pause. The idea is knight to b6. And I think this is a very, very strange but strong move. The reason why it's strange is because it cuts off the mobility of the queen, and that's a little uncomfortable. But what you get for it is a knight potentially coming to c4. Now that's an issue. For example, if they ignore things and they play something like nothing at all, for example, let's just pass the move back to black, knight to c4 could be played, queen to c1, now knight takes on b2, and after queen takes on b2, knight takes on e4, taking advantage of the diagonal, and black is now winning the game. Simply way too much activity and way too many weaknesses for white, and also black's winning material, so that's also something that's pretty important. So they played queen c1, which preemptively covers the dark squares around the queen side. Now that knight c4, or if it comes or anything, they're not hanging material with knight takes b2 immediately. They have a move to deal with it. I go knight c4 anyways because it's not so obvious how they're going to defend here. For example, knight takes on a3 is a little bit of a threat to win material. And so they go knight to d5, and this is completely aimed at the fact that this knight was a little overloaded. For example, if I were to be able to pass the move, I don't know if I can pass the move again. I did that preemptively. Let's just say king h1. Knight takes a3 has to be considered, where if you take it, now queen takes on c3 is possible, and c2 is even under threat. But it all goes around to the idea that this pawn is overloaded, defending way too many things, and everything just feels a little weak. So, yeah, with knight to d5, I take it, and here I have to be careful. I should not take on b2. This would be stupid because they can take on a5. And I can't take back without, just hanging my bishop and not being able to take their queen. So I'd have to take their queen, but after rook a7, bishop takes g5, knight takes g5, things work out for them. And I had a pretty nice position where I was targeting weaknesses to all of a sudden things are traded, they have their own threats, and this is really annoying, not great. Yeah, so don't want to do that. So here, I played an interesting move that I'm actually very proud of. So where are the weaknesses, again, in black's position, and what are the moves you want to play? I'll give you a little bit of time to think about it. Okay, so if you're thinking queen b6, I think you're on the right path. Because you're attacking b2, you're getting out of the attack, and you're adding even another attacker to b2. The problem here is b3, and you're not really winning this pawn so easily. For example, if you go bishop to b2, eventually after the queen moves, for example, queen to b1 here, now you have two problems. You have the bishop, which is about to lose a defender of the knight, and if you move the knight, for example, knight takes on a3, again, yeah, you lose the bishop, but if you move the knight, you lose the bishop anyways, and if you move the bishop, you lose the knight. So this is not playable, unfortunately, and yeah, b3 is just a problem. After b3, also something to mention is that b3, you took away your best square for the knight. You want to go knight b6, and now you can't. So that's another problem. Instead, queen to c7 is what I played. And the idea here, and it didn't really take me too long to consider, which I'm kind of happy with. The idea here with this move is that now if b3 comes, I can play a move like knight to b6. I'm getting a tempo on the rook, and I have a pretty active position here, for example, after rook to d2. And I can continue things on with something like knight d7, where after even something like c4, I could consider b5, but I think stronger is knight c5 first, attacking b3. They defend it, queen c6, and then b5. Yeah, you get a very, very, very strong position here, just completely opening up this queenside area. This bishop is doing an amazing job just covering certain squares that would otherwise be kind of useful for white, and now they're not. So b3 is kind of what I was expecting. I think that's the strongest move, but instead they played what I was really hoping for, and that's c3. Now c3 is a little bit of a problem for white. Now b3 doesn't really come as easily because they're weakening a lot of squares around the queen side. When you push a pawn, remember, you weaken a bunch of squares. So now, at this point, I played an interesting move once again. If you want to think about it, feel free to. But think about being as greedy as possible. And that's a little bit of a hint, obviously. The idea is queen to b6. Now, queen to b6, going from c7 back to b6, it feels like a waste of time, but now b3 is not possible. And if they go b4, this is really bad because now they're weakening the c3 pawn. Once again, a3 is still weakened, but something we could do here is go back to c7, something that looks absolutely insane, but we're considering moves like knight to b6, and then just winning the c3 pawn. All that just to provoke a bunch of weaknesses. My opponent played bishop to h6 here, and I believe I thought for a little while here, yeah, about 9 minutes on this move. I was a little bit worried that maybe my opponent would get a little bit of initiative going. So I wanted to be careful that it didn't work out. I calculated, and I didn't really see anything. So I took on b2, and after bishop takes g7, king takes g7, my opponent played knight to d4. Now, this has an immediate threat of rook to b5. It also has some ideas maybe in the air of knight f5 check, queen g5, just something like this. And although this doesn't work, you have to be really careful that it doesn't, because when you see a move like knight f5 check and then queen g5 check, and you're seeing check, 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 check over and over again, sometimes your mind can play a little bit of tricks on you, and even though maybe you feel like it doesn't work or whatever, like, it's a little scary, right? The threat can be stronger than the execution. So, anyways, that's why I calculated knight takes b2 for so long, but I just brought my knight back to c4. Stronger, actually, is knight to a4, just attacking the c3 pawn, threatening to take it. This is very good. It, to me, looked a little bit scarier to bring my knight to the side of the board. I just wanted to centralize things as fast as possible, just in case if there's any sort of crazy attack that could happen. And another idea that I was considering was rook h5. Luckily, this doesn't really work. I can take it because after queen g5 check, king h8, queen h6, very importantly, there's f6. And this was seen ahead of time, just to make sure that knight to g5 does not come, because that would be pretty much just checkmate here. And yeah, things are working out. Now I can play moves like rook to g8, maybe rook to g6, just kind of consolidate the position and win with the extra 6 points of material. So knight to d4. Now we see knight c4 and knight, queen to g5 check. So again, knight to f5 check, I had to consider. It looked really scary, but I didn't see anything at all. It looked like nothing more than just like maybe some sort of trick, hoping I mess up somehow into something. But it's not even clear how I would do that. So after queen to g5, now knight f5 becomes a little bit more serious, because there's knight takes e7, for example, or maybe even knight to h6. Just knight to f5 is no longer winning a piece. So I decided to play e6 here, and this does something else as well. It also kicks the rook. But also importantly, now knight f5 is not really working because I can take it with the pawn. So we see rook b5, the only square for the rook. I bring my queen back to c7, and then h4. The queen is going for my king. Maybe h5 and h6 could be played, and if that happens, that could be really dangerous. Like, for example, if they get h5, h6, and queen f6, I could be losing. Like, let's just play a6, for example, h5, and then I take it. Maybe h6 now, and then, yeah, just queen f6. I'm not really sure if this is completely working. It looks like maybe I have king to f8, but you see the idea. Things are a little scary here. Luckily, there's actually king to f8, so I'm not completely lost yet. But I still have to be careful. I mean, like, knight takes b5, queen e7, queen g7 would be checkmate. So, yeah, it just feels like things are in the air, even if concretely I should be okay. But after h6, or after h4, I played h6 just to make sure that there's no h5, h6 of their own. If they ever play h5, maybe I could play g5, and that actually might come into play later. Queen to g3, and now I play h6. So if I play h5, this is a big mistake. They can take on h5, and they've actually equalized material, and I don't really think they're worse anymore. Even though they, there's some problems with maybe a3 and c3. The problem is after taking on h5, I mean, like, they're already threatening things like queen g5, queen h6. Now knight f5 could be considered again, even if it is a full sacrifice. Things are annoying. I have to be careful. But with a6, now, if they play rook h5, that looks really silly. I could play something like king to h7, and I'm threatening to take their rook, so they have to be careful there. But that's why they played rook to b4. And now I play h5. This was not necessary. Turns out I have a better move, but we're going to see exactly what the idea was a move from now. But h5, all in all, I still think is a pretty strong move, and I believe that I'm pretty much winning here. Here, though, actually, let's just show what happened in the game. They played f4, and then I have a nice opportunity to pretty much force a bunch of stuff off the board and reduce a lot of their counterplay with knight to d2, and then queen takes on c3. And that's kind of the idea here, actually. After rook to b4, turns out knight to d2 is quite strong with queen c3. And I can give up the b7 pawn because I win a3 at the end. For example, takes, rook takes b7, rook takes on, I believe a3 should be okay. I'm wondering if rook to d3 was slightly stronger first or something, but you get the point. These positions are pretty nice for black, up 2 points of material. Things feel a little bit loose for white's position. Black feels pretty comfortable. But yeah, after h5, f4, and then knight to d2, rook to e1 was played. I took on c3, and then they took. And I think practically maybe it's a mistake, but it's also really hard to avoid it. The problem is rook e3 doesn't really work because of queen c1 check. And after rook to e1, now there's knight takes on e4. This is something I actually did calculate. I was trying to make sure that everything was working out. The idea here is that after rook takes e1, check, I can give a check, king h2, and then I can take, and I'm just up in exchange here, which is obviously winning. And yeah, knight takes e6 is in here. I don't know why. I'm just going to ignore that. Maybe it's something that I was looking at before, but yeah, they took on c3, they took on b7, and then I played what I felt like was an important move here in e5. Now, this does a few things. The first thing is that if they end up playing takes, and knight f3, I would be pretty happy to take, and then maybe take on f3 first. Maybe take on a3, actually. Just get the pawn here, and then at some point I could maybe take on f3, maybe play something like rook d8, rook c8. Black's just winning at this point anyways. So yeah, but e5 just felt like a nice move because knight e6 check was just kind of always in the air, and I didn't like that at all. So they took, and then they played rook to e2 to attack my knight on d2, and I dealt with this in an interesting way. I played rook c1 check, where after king h2, there's knight to f1, and then I just actually win the knight on d4. So they go king f2, I give a check, and they go king to g3. This is a mistake, I think. I think they should have gone king e3, but after knight c4, king to d3, there was knight to d6. Where after rook d7, there's rook d1 check, and then rook takes on d4, which is kind of a crazy variation, but I end up winning the knight here. But instead, they played king g3. I get to take on d4, and then I get to take on e4. And although I don't win the piece, it's actually a mating net, surprisingly. They're going to have problems with rook to g4 check in a lot of positions, and that's actually going to help me win, maybe win, the h4 pawn. So here they played rook to b4, and I go rook to g4 check. So they can't go king h3 because of checkmate, so they go king h2, but now I get to take on h4 with check. King g3, rook back to g4, and then they have to go back to h2, which is really annoying for anything like that. I go rook to a1, they go a4, and again, another move that I feel pretty happy about in this game. I played d3, and the idea behind d3 is any rook endgame where it's just one rook versus one rook, I have too many pawns. If we just do all the forcing moves here, takes, and then takes, if I can take properly. I have the a pawn. I have also 2 extra pawns on this side of the board. I can play moves like f5, king g5, or king h6, king g5. Eventually bring my rook down, just bring my pawn, all the way back to a2, go f3 or f4, and then f3 at some point. Like, for example, it's kind of a long variation, but I don't think it's bad at all. King g3, let's just say. I just go f5. I'm trying to think of a move for them. Let's just say rook d8, because this kind of helps my point. I'll go king to h6. They go rook a8 just to get behind the pawn. This is kind of like what you'd see in some endgames here. Oh, sorry, it's their move. Let's just go here. I'll go here. Just trying to display some stuff here. Oh, it's their move again. Oh my gosh. Okay. And then, yeah, they just shuffle. Even though this is obviously, like, this is just like one potential plan at some point. And then I can just go f4. And the idea here is that, oh yeah, king g3, f4 here, and then f3. The idea here is they can actually never take this pawn. Let's throw in rook a5 check, because why not? Let's let them take. The problem is if they go king g3, I could give a check and then promote. So they can't do that, so they should just shuffle their rook. But after f2, this pawn's promoting. And if they go away from it, I can always just give a check and then promote anyways. And I also have another pawn in the bank, even if they could take, which they can't. Yeah, so just overall completely winning. And yeah, kind of a weird way to show that, but it also feels like, what else did they do there? Like, maybe they could try to get active or do something, but like, that's just the first thought that comes into my mind, is I could just push the a pawn up, even with my rook in front of the pawn, which is where you normally don't want it, and just go for that position, where I just push the pawn all the way to a2, and if the white king goes anywhere too fancy, then yeah, I just give a check. And then if they even win the a2 pawn, it's still winning, because I have 3 pawns on the king side versus their 1. So anyways, rook to b7, rook takes a4, g3, and now I play h4. And this is where my opponent resigns. Because the problem here is I am able to just take. I have 4 pawns versus their 0. That's just too many pawns at this point. And I can actually now defend d3. And here also, if they wanted to take d3, which I guess they could, now I could do something like rook takes on g3, for example. Again, any rook ending is a very simple win for me. So I would be happy to give up a pawn just to make that happen. But yeah, I think the simplest way to understand is that taking here and taking here. Too many pawns. I can go like rook d4, rook c4, rook c2. I think that's one of the easiest ways to do it. And again, the important thing is I could even sacrifice that pawn by doing that. For example, king g3. Let's go... Heck, let's even go like this rook to d4. I'm not sure. Yeah, let's go this rook to d4. And then I'm going to go rook e4. Let's say they even get the second rank. I go rook e4. They go king f3. And then I go rook to e2. They could even take here, do this trick, and then take here. Doesn't matter. Either way, we're ending up in some sort of position at some point where I can build a construction and force a trade of one of the rooks off, which means that they have no more counterplay. 2 rooks, you can create some sort of like some sort of attack, sometimes some sort of counterplay, but with 1, it's just not enough here. Yeah, and that's how the game went. So overall, I feel like the lesson that I learned here was that it had to do a little bit with sidelines, actually, because when I played this game, I was actually a little worried that they would play it with moves like c4, or just even like c4 first, is pretty strong, or even like knight c3 I think is pretty good, or just focusing on like castling as well. But like these positions, these Maroxy binds, they feel really annoying, and I didn't really like feel comfortable until maybe like here-ish. Oh yeah, and yeah, somewhere around here is one of the first moments where I actually think I felt comfortable for the first time, I think after castling. Uh, and it's kind of because my opponent kind of didn't go for the more critical lines in the sideline. And that's kind of a lesson in itself, right? If you're playing a sideline, um, unless there's something specific prepared, which it didn't seem like there was, like, again, after knight c3, black is supposedly better according to the engine. Um, I don't think people playing with the white pieces are going to go for positions where they're already worse out at the opening, unless it's like some sort of crazy tactical line that's a little bit different. But this is kind of one of those more casual positions. So, um, yeah, it taught me that like I gotta be a little bit more studious with these sidelines, just like my opponents, because uh, they're getting way more popular these days because kind of everything's playable. So yeah, that's going to be it for this game. I hope you guys enjoyed the recap. I will see you all in round 4 with the next one. And that one's a pretty crazy game. So yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll see you there. Bye-bye.